Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, dubious speculation. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothe.cryptoverse.com. In this video, I want to talk a little bit about the move that we're continuing to watch, all these green candles in a row. We'll talk a little bit about the monthly close. I do want to at least briefly mention altcoins and in relation to Bitcoin dominance. So we're going to talk about a few things in the video. I'll also try to be candid with everyone about, things that have gone the way that I thought, things that haven't, and just take it from there. So, one of the things that we mentioned coming into this year is that typically speaking, in pre-halving years, we have about 5 or 6 months that are red and 5 or 6 months that are green. That is what has historically happened, right? So like in 2011 we had 6 red months and 6 green months. In 2015 we had 5 red and 7 green, and then in 2019 we had 6 red and 6 green. So it's more or less been about half and half. So what we've seen over the last 3 pre-halving years. This pre-halving year has certainly deviated from that. Okay, because we've already had 8 green months. So even if December were to close red, it would still only be 4 red months for the entire year. So there's a deviation in what we've historically seen in pre-halving years compared to this year. Okay. Now I will say, because a lot of people sort of assume what I'm doing based on expectations of markets, but I will remind you guys, all I do is I DCA according to the risk levels, right, that I use. So like when the risk levels are low, I DCA in. When the risk levels are high, I DCA out. What that has meant so far this cycle is I DCA'd in some in late 2022, and now I'm just sort of sitting on my hands, right? Like I haven't made any significant moves since then. One thing that oftentimes people ask me about are altcoins, and what are my views on altcoins. My primary view on altcoins are that they are likely going to not keep pace with Bitcoin. That is my base view. Okay, so I've had this view for a long time that just sitting in Bitcoin will help improve your risk-adjusted returns, because Bitcoin is more likely to rally before the altcoin market would, right? Like, so the only reason the altcoin market would rally is if Bitcoin rallies first, was the argument. And so, Bitcoin dominance should go up in that scenario. But I do want to say again, and I mentioned this a couple times in videos, a week or two ago, that with the altcoin market, one notable thing is the fact that Total 3 did in fact put in a higher high. Right? So rather than pretend like it's not happening, just come out and say, guys, this is a higher high. So there is a potential shift in the trend. It doesn't mean that we won't eventually get a correction back down, right? I mean, we could go down and then go back up, right? And then maybe sometime out in 2024, we get a hard landing, right? But that doesn't mean that there's not necessarily money to be made in the altcoin market in the meantime. So while I still hold my Bitcoin dominance views, because I still think that Bitcoin will outperform the altcoin market, I do want to remind people that if you want to take on the risk in the altcoin market, it is your risk to take on, and you have to be careful with it, because some altcoins they get rugged, and a lot of them don't keep pace with Bitcoin anyways. But I've seen a lot of comments from people saying, okay, well, what about alts? What about alts? I'm just going to defer back to these other videos saying, look, guys, we've already acknowledged here, this is a higher high, okay? I've also explained my reasoning for thinking that the Bitcoin dominance is going higher, although I could be wrong. And so, if you do want to take on the risk of the altcoin market, just know that those alts are, continuing to compete with Bitcoin. That doesn't mean that none of them can compete. It just means that I would expect most of them to sort of fall behind Bitcoin's trajectory. We still have this whole SPY ETF stuff potentially coming up in January. It seems like, Bitcoin dominance is still in a macro uptrend, considering that it hasn't put in a lower low. While Total 3 has put in a higher high, Bitcoin dominance has not put in a lower low, and it's still far from it. I mean, it'd have to go below 48, 49% for it to really be a convincing lower low. And I don't think that's the most likely outcome. I think the more likely outcome is that Bitcoin dominance goes higher. So just know that if you are taking on the risk of the altcoin market, you're sort of fighting against Bitcoin, which has been showing relative strength compared to the altcoin market for the entire year. Okay, so again, altcoin market, it's there if you want to take the risk. If you don't want to take the risk, you can always just focus on a Bitcoin heavy portfolio, which is what I focused on for the last 2 years. But I do imagine that sometime in the halving year, altcoins could start to durably outperform Bitcoin, but that is still a little bit away. So going to monthly candles, I want to look at this because again, we just had another green month for Bitcoin. So that brings you up to 8 green months. Again, looking at monthly returns, 2011, 2015, 2019 were all about half and half green, half red. 2023 has obviously gone more so in the direction of green, considering we've only had 3 red months so far. And even if December is a red month, which it very well might not be, but even if it is a red month, you still only have 4 red months in 2023. So one of the things that we discussed previously was getting a correction over here in August or September of the pre-halving year. This is a correction that we normally get in Bitcoin. It's happened every single time. So if you go take a look at, all these prior August or Septembers of the pre-halving year, Bitcoin has always fallen below its bull market support band. And so this time was not different, right? It was not different. Our expectation of a seasonal correction in the S&P in Q3 of the pre-election year occurred. Then Bitcoin, of course, went below the bull market support band. The main difference between 2019 and 2023 is that in 2019, we put in a lower low, but in 2023, we put in a higher low. Other assets like Ethereum put in a lower low, right? So you can see like Ethereum put in this low, and then this move over here, it was a lower low, right? So it was a lot different than what Bitcoin did, right? Bitcoin put in a higher low. Now, we pointed this out, right? We pointed out that this was a higher low that was different than what we saw in 2019, okay? It was a deviation from the path that we saw in 2019. And again, 2019 was six red months and 6 green months, whereas 2023 has already had 8 green months. So that trend of what we've seen in prior pre-halving years has not played out this year. So I think the thing to look for now is, this rally has continued on for a long time. By the way, one of the other things that I just want to briefly mention before I forget, you guys remember how we always have fallen below the bull market support band in pre-halving years. There's another trend that has been an interesting trend to observe, and that's that in either December or January of either December of the pre-halving year or January of the halving year, we found ourselves at the 100-week moving average. So in December of 2011, we were at the 100-week moving average. In January of the halving year over here in 2016, we were at the 100-week moving average. In January of 2020, again, we were at the 100-week moving average. So you can see that around December to January, we've always been at the 100-week SMA, right? 3 times in a row. And again, we're just sort of comparing this to the same thing we just talked about of how the bull market support band, how we've always had a weekly close. We've always dropped below the bull market support band in Q3 of the pre-halving year, right? So this is just repetition, right? It seems like it's the same thing 3 times in a row. And so then when we go look at what's going on today, we can see something similar in the fact that we dropped below the bull market support band here, right? But we're nowhere near the 100-week moving average, and it's December. Will this time be different, right? It could be. I mean, again, this pre-halving year has already played out differently than most pre-halving years, just in terms of how many green months and how many red months. But the 100-week SMA is all the way down, at well below $30,000. It's a little below $28,000. But do note that as the weeks go by, it'll probably start to, it looks like it's starting to curl back up a little bit here. So that would be an area to look at over the next couple of months in case there is a larger pullback. In the short term, if there are pullbacks, then I think you have to look at, we've briefly talked a little bit about things like the, let me see if I can find it. There's a projection out here of a forecast for the 8-week, 20-week, and the 21-week EMA, and that's what this looks like. So in the short term, you can see that the 8-week moving average, which currently is sitting at around just below $35,000, that would be a pretty big area of support if we were to fall back to that level. That is in fact where Bitcoin found support right here. It found temporary support right there throughout. You can see it bounced off of it right there as well. Throughout a lot of 2021, it was bouncing off that 8-week moving average. So that, I think, is your initial support level in the event of a deeper pullback. Would be around 34 to 35K. If it goes lower than that, then you still have, this area up here, right? You have the bull market support band. You have these prior highs. There's a lot of different support levels that you could point to that Bitcoin might try to hold as support in the event of a substantial pullback. There's also no guarantee that even comes. Bitcoin just continues to slowly grind higher, not really giving many people the opportunity to scale in if they don't already have a position. So, again, this is what? We're currently our 7th green week in a row. That doesn't happen that often, right? With Bitcoin, you don't see 7 green weeks in a row that frequently. So, if there is a deeper pullback at some point, then those are the levels that you look at, right? Like you look at the 8-week SMA, you look at these prior highs, and you also look at the bull market support band. Those would be the main areas that you would look for in the event of a more substantial pullback. If we don't get a more substantial pullback, right? If there's just a sustained rally, a durable rally that just goes through December and doesn't stop until the SPY ETF, then that's one way that the dominance could absolutely soar. Okay, if there's not a larger pullback. One of the ways that dominance goes down is when Bitcoin is trending sideways above its bull market support band, but not making any progress. But while it seems like Bitcoin has been going sideways, it's not really going sideways. Like, it has been making progress. It's been going up. And while today Bitcoin dominance is down a little bit, just below 53%, you can see that dominance has been slowly starting to trend back up, right? It found this low over here below 52% at 51.76%. Now it's all the way back up to 52.9%. So it does continue to go higher. And my expectation is that it will likely continue to move higher, and it should outperform the collective altcoin market, especially as we get closer to the SPY ETF hype that's going to be here in December and January, right? The hype that sort of comes with that. So that, I think, is relevant to think about, is like, if there are no deeper pullbacks and it just leaves people behind, then that's sort of prime for Bitcoin dominance to soar, which has been our expectation, right? It's been my expectation that we'll spend the entire year watching the Bitcoin dominance go up. So, that does continue to play out. That's one of the predictions this year that has really performed quite well, because we've only even had one wick below the 20-week SMA, below the bull market support band in general for Bitcoin dominance. So Bitcoin, as it continues to trend up, it's sort of getting squeezed here, right? And there's going to have to be some type of direction soon. Okay, we can't. If you look at, there's this trend line that you can look at, right? We've just been continuing to hold as support on the trend line. There's been a couple of fake outs, right? One wick below it, a daily close below it, but nothing so far. It also seems like it's, building up to something, right? And there's only so much longer that we can stay in this range before it's time to make a decision, right? We've had a lot of wicks above 38K, which is where we are right now, a lot of wicks above it, but we haven't had any daily closes up here. So if you can get a daily close up here, that would be, a more positive sign, but so far that has not happened. If on the other hand, you sort of interpret this not as a triangle, but if as a wedge, then you could argue that we could continue to sort of trend in this, in this zone for a long time before we actually have to make a decision. So I suppose it really depends on how you view that. But, I'm still of the opinion that Bitcoin should outperform collectively most everything else, at least through the end of the year, maybe into early January. That is my general expectation. So far this year, dominance has gone up, right? And it would be nice to have like sort of a grand finale rally in Bitcoin dominance as we go into, the next 4 to 6 weeks going into the SPOT ETF. And it's possible, I don't know for sure, right? It's possible that could end up marking a significant high on Bitcoin dominance if something like that were to play out. But that is my general expectation, is that dominance goes up. Now, if there is a pullback, you have to imagine what would cause a pullback, right? First of all, you don't really need a narrative. But if there is a narrative to put with one, it could be all sorts of things. Could be something related to the Cryptoverse. It could be the labor market showing weakness next week. We're going to get a lot of labor reports next week. We're going to get, the unemployment rate and job openings and continued claims, initial claims. We're going to get all that again. So that could be the narrative. But even in that case, there is still support for Bitcoin at various levels that I imagine the bulls would come in and try to hold the line. So those are the areas I think you have to watch in terms of support. The 8-week SMA, which has been holding as support, the prior breakout area at around 31 to 32K, and then also the bull market support band, which coincidentally happens to correspond to, it's coming up to this level at around 31 to 32K. Remember that the 100-week SMA has come into play in prior pre-halving years, at the very end of the year, or in the early part of the halving year. So that would be something I think to consider. And if it does play out, then we'll sort of take inventory of that and compare it to the prior times that it played out and talk about most likely outcomes. And I know people, again, would really like me to talk about altcoins more and to just go full degen. But my views are that altcoins can go up as long as Bitcoin does, but they should underperform Bitcoin going into the end of the year. That's my guess, okay? But again, if you want to take on the risk of the altcoin market, then you are, of course, free to do so. It's your own risk to take. There's a lot of great people out there that talk about altcoins all the time and can give you, pretty great insight into that. So do check those other channels out if you're wanting more insight into sort of how the altcoin market is behaving, especially with respect to Bitcoin or just respect to the US dollar. If Bitcoin were to break up, so we've sort of covered if it breaks down, where could it potentially go to, right? But if it doesn't break down, right? If it breaks to the upside, where are the resistance levels? And there's all sorts of resistance levels that you could point to, but one of the resistance levels I imagine would be at around this level right here, right? So you have this level here. And the reason why I point that one out is because if you look at last cycle, you can see that this high right here, we were only able to barely get above it, right? That high right there. So that I think would be a pretty significant resistance level to close above. That also happened to correspond, by the way, to the 618, right? So if you look at the Fibonacci retracement, that was the 618. This cycle, the 618 is at around that level. Yeah, it's right at that level, right? So the 618 is right around that level that corresponds to this, to this move right here. So that would be, I think, a pretty important resistance level at around $48,000. There is another school of thought. There's another school of thought, though, that I think a lot of people have spoken about this. I've spoken about it before many times, and that is that it perhaps might be more useful to take 64K as the peak rather than 69K. And if you do that, then the 618 is actually at 46K. So a little bit different, right? So 46K versus 48K. And if you look at sort of this trend line here, right, you can see that it's even higher up, right? It would even actually be above the 618, which kind of corresponds to this one, right? Sort of the same type of trend line over here. If I can draw it on the chart, right? So it sort of corresponds to that trend line. So I think for me, that would be the most optimistic outcome going into, into the spot ETF stuff. It would be sort of repeating what we did in 2019, where you go up to the 618, maybe you wick a little bit above it, but that would be the more optimistic outcome, especially if there's not, a deeper multi-week pullback. Sometimes you get pullbacks, but it can be very brief. For instance, in 2019, we had a pullback going, before moving up into this move here, and it was just like a single 13% drop in a week, right? So, I mean, just for the record, right, like a 13% drop would put Bitcoin right around 33K or so from the current prices. If it moved a little bit higher, I mean, if you take it from where it previously was, then a 13% drop gets you to just below 34K. So not too far away from the 8-week moving average. So those are the sort of the areas that I would look at. And I mean, it can be difficult, right? To sort of get back into things when you're looking at the market, you're saying, all right, about half up, half down, but then noticing that it put in a higher low, blasted through the bull market support band, right? So like, what do you do, right? I haven't, I've just been riding the Bitcoin that I bought last year, but it's hard when you're, if you're looking at the market, you're waiting for a pullback, and it's just 1 week after another, it just slowly climbs. Right. And so the way that I navigate such market conditions, and the way that I've said that I've navigated such market conditions for the last 2 years, is to just keep my portfolio Bitcoin heavy, because I know that Bitcoin gives me exposure to the upside, but minimizes my downside risk. One way to sort of visualize that is to look where Bitcoin is. It's already way back up here. And look at total 3. Comparatively, like total 3 isn't even above where it was in August of 2022. So that's one of the reasons now, hopefully you can see it now that we've gone out this far, why a Bitcoin heavy portfolio makes a lot more sense, because it leads the market, right? If it's a bull market, it leads it. And if it's not a bull market, the dominance can still go up. Just like dominance has gone up previously when the market was bearish. So this is one way to sort of recognize that Bitcoin leads. And the only way the altcoin market goes up is if Bitcoin goes up first, right? That's the argument, and it always has been the argument, and it will always be the argument, more than likely. Unless I see, market conditions really changing, that will be my argument, especially after you put in a major top, that, whatever you want in crypto, if you limit it to mostly Bitcoin, it will at least help preserve the Satoshi valuation of your portfolio, whereas altcoin heavy portfolios will not until you get to some point in the halving year. So I will stick with that view, but know that I'm willing to pivot that view by the end of the year. Note that if Bitcoin goes up for the rest of the year, then total 3 will also likely go up for the rest of the year. Okay, so please please understand that if Bitcoin goes up in December, the altcoin market will likely go up in December. And even if the altcoin market goes up in December, it could still correspond to higher Bitcoin dominance, right? So imagine total 3 goes up to 450 billion or something. It could still be higher Bitcoin dominance if Bitcoin is all the way up in the mid 40s or something. So I think that's the hard part for people, is that they'll say, all right, well, Bitcoin dominance went up, that's great, but altcoins are also off their lows even more. The point is that you could just sit in Bitcoin, right? That's the point, is you could just sit in Bitcoin and ideally watch alt Bitcoin pairs bleed. And then you can then use your Bitcoin in the halving year to purchase whatever altcoins that you want because they've been devalued on their Bitcoin valuations. So that's sort of the argument, and it's been playing out so far. We'll continue to see if it plays out or not. But again, like I am aware of the higher high on Total 3, and I just want to continue to reiterate to people that if you want to take on the risk of altcoins, then just understand what the risk is, and I wish, hopefully it goes really, really well. But my counter argument is that if alts are going up, it's only because Bitcoin is also going up. And Bitcoin has been going up, right? I mean, it's been slowly trending higher here. If we were to look at the extension off of the 20-week SMA, right? Actually, let me look at it in a different way. Let's look at it in terms of the short-term bubble risk, right? It's still around, where it was back over here in January, right? So still pretty much around the same level as it was back then. So, it's extended, but it's not as extended as it was back in March, but it is extended. It's not like this, at least, right? I mean, if you get something like that, then it's really dangerous. But it is extended, but not quite as extended as it was back in March. So, one thing that I've learned over the years is that, when you put a prediction on Bitcoin and Bitcoin exceeds it, you don't move the goalpost. Okay. So as a reminder, and I don't even know why I do this to myself because it's just sort of but it's important for us to be honest with ourselves and not to pretend something is I'm not going to pretend like I get everything right when I know that's clearly not true. And one of those things was I thought Bitcoin would not go higher than 35K, and it has. And so then people will say, well, where is the top? Where is the top? And my response is, well, go ask someone else. Go ask someone who said it could have gone above 35K. Because I thought 35K was going to be the yearly high. And that was wrong, right? And, because that's wrong, it's silly to then shift the goalpost and say, all right, well, I was wrong about 35K, but no, it's definitely going to be 36. Or, oh, no, wait, no, just you wait. It's going to be 37, right? It's dangerous. So I think the better course of action is to just say, it exceeded my expectations. It often does that. Bitcoin often goes higher than we think. And then when corrections occur, it often goes lower than we think. That's what Bitcoin normally does. It goes higher than we think, and then it goes lower than we think. And for me this year, it's going higher than I thought. 35K was my upper limit. It went above that. And so rather than spend too much time trying to figure out where it's going to top out in the short term before a larger pullback, it's just to say, guys, it's exceeded my expectations. I don't know where it's going to go in the short term. I will defer to other people that were more optimistic about it because they have probably a better handle on the short-term implications of the market. That is honestly what my view would be. Okay? I've talked about implications in the short term, right? If there's a pullback, right? I mean, you can look at the implications of where you would try to find support at the prior breakout, which could correspond to the bull market support band, right? I think one thing to consider is that it would almost be more bullish if you did get a pullback and held it as support, right? Because that's what it had been doing. Sometimes you need to go back and sort of confirm that you can hold it as support before you trend up. The issue is if you don't do that, then when you do eventually correct, it can be a lot more brutal. Like in 2019, we never really had a good test of the 20-week SMA. And then when we finally got back down to it, it was really hard to hold it. And when we did get above it, or when we did fall below it, it was hard to get back above it in any durable way. So that's the thing. It's almost like if you want Bitcoin to have a more sustained, durable run here for many, many more months, it would almost be more ideal to get some type of a pullback. But if it doesn't, which is possible, right? There are times where Bitcoin just runs and it doesn't give people the time to get back in, right? If it just runs, then that likely just means that whenever the correction does come, whether it's sometime in 2024, right, that it's not as likely to hold. That's what it tends to mean, Okay, and you can see that happen over here in 2021, right? It rallied forever, didn't hold, it never really tested it except for here in October. And then finally, when it did test it, we fell below it. So I guess it more so depends on, you know, if you're looking for longevity or just for the sort of the quick move. And I mean, again, I don't know the short term, you know, the short term view on this. Like, I don't know if it's going to back test this or not, or if it's just going to continue to lock people out and trend higher into the spot ETF. I don't know. But what I feel the most confident on, which maybe will turn out to be wrong, but is that I still think that dominance will go up, and so that's the reason why I'm sticking with a Bitcoin heavy portfolio. Even though I know that alts have been doing well, I still think Bitcoin will more than likely outperform the altcoin market going into the next like 4 to 6 weeks or so. I mean, Ethereum has had a pretty decent move here in the short term, right? It's almost back up to 2100. If it can break out of this, then I suppose the next area to look for could be the wedge sort of view rather than the ascending triangle. It could be the wedge, which would all, you know, be up at around 2250. So around 2250, I think, is relevant. And the other thing I think is relevant with Ether is the Ether Bitcoin valuation, right? The Ether Bitcoin valuation is currently at 0.05497, so about 0.055. That's basically where it opened the week at. It's at 0.055, and you know, this is potentially decision week. And I mean, last time you could see we had 4 candles down here, and then the 5th one was decision time. This is 4 candles, and we're currently in our 5th candle. My view is that if Bitcoin gets an explosive move to the upside, it should break Ether off of its support with Bitcoin. It should break it below this. That's my thought. If Ether rallies in the short term, then it still has the, you know, the bull market support band to contend with, which is around 0.0587 to 0.0592. Okay, so I mean, it could still go up from here and still be below the 20-week estimate, 21-week EMA, right? Like a 6 or 7% move would still be below that. So that is what, you know, I think is relevant to sort of think about here, is that level if it were to get a push up, which I mean, again, it has moved a little bit higher today. So that's the level that I would look for as strong resistance on the Ether Bitcoin pair. Because if it gets there, then I imagine it'll be Bitcoin's time to take over if it doesn't take over before that. The problem is that, you know, while Ethereum can go higher as long as Bitcoin does, at some point, Bitcoin will likely rein back control, like it often can sometime in early December, and sort of take, you know, still the show for a few weeks. So I wouldn't be that surprised to see something like that play out again. But anyways, you know, we've talked about a lot of different things here. You know, we'll see where we will see where things end up. If Bitcoin does get a push into the 40K region, I think dominance is going to go up, and that could be sufficient to break Ether Bitcoin off of its support. But we'll see, you know, we'll see where it ultimately pans out. Remember, you have 46K, 48K, depending on whether you take this as the peak or this is the peak, that those would be probably significant resistance levels to break through. And if we get a pullback instead, then you're looking at the 100-week, the bull market support band, the 8-week SMA, right? So yes, I'm saying it could go up or down. And the truth is I don't know what direction it'll go in the short term. It's just, those are the areas that I would look for. Anyways, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe, give the video a thumbs up. And again, check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. See you guys next time. Bye.